If you are watching your weight and are counting calories, to either live or work at a rectory during the Advent Christmas season is tremendously frustrating because our parishioners are extravagant in sharing with us wonderful things, from cookies to chocolates to cheese and crackers and sausage and fudge. Thank God I have a very long dining room table because that's where it all gets to move to. I was thinking, what would we consider to be the foods of Christmas? So it would certainly be cookies, candy canes, maybe rum balls for a few people, chocolate, eggnog, and the everlasting fruitcake. But notice the commonality. Those are all sweets. Those are all desserts. What are some of the entrees that we might have, or do we just sugar binge it all day long? You know, when we grew up, Christmas Eve was always a pizza night. We had pizza, we opened gifts, we would go to church on Christmas Day. Some of you may have had already, or still may have this afternoon, the sausage and egg casserole. For some Italians, and mostly New York roots, this is the feast known as the Feast of Seven Fish. They have a great spread on Christmas Eve. But what would be some of the other staples that people tend to have on Christmas? Ham? Oh yeah. Stuffing. Pardon? Stuffing, okay. What else do we have? Shrimp. Whoa, let's go over to their house today. Pardon? Noodles? Okay. Lasagna. See, now the Italians start coming out. I start hearing. Wine? All right. Rose? Okay. Thank you. All right. So we do have some staples, don't we? And so what strikes me is that our readings today give an assessment, if you would, observations of the human condition. They talk about a people who are weary, who walk in darkness, have experienced gloom, that there is war and violence, and people are afraid. But they also say that we are a people who long for peace and joy, for acceptance and love. I'd like to add one more human condition, and that is we are people who are hungry. We are literally, physically hungry for food. But we are also emotionally hungry, and we are spiritually hungry. And there are various things we do to meet those hungers. Very simply, on physical, we'll go to the grocery store. But also remember that old axiom, you never go grocery shopping when you're hungry. Because you'll be buying a lot of stuff, and a lot of stuff. But also some of our friends will go to St. Vincent de Paul, or St. Anthony's Food Pantry, or the Rock Church to find some food. I was reading one of those sort of feel-good articles in the Post yesterday morning, a collaboration between DePaul Hospital and its maternity unit, along with Operation Food Search. And they put together a program called Fresh RX, a nourishing, healthy start, and talking about the importance of fresh food, good food for women who are pregnant and immediately after giving birth to the child. Because they follow that axiom, food is medicine. And all the changes and helps it can make just by having a really good staple diet. What do we do when we are emotionally hungry? For me, I think the greatest thing is to have that one person in your life. Could be spouse, could be friend, it could be child, it could be neighbor. But there's that one person with whom you can be authentic, that you can be honest, revelatory, vulnerable, who will listen unconditionally to you so that you can have someone to touch base with on your feelings and the hungers they bring. Spiritual hunger, maybe to turn to some time of prayer, a spiritual book, the Word of God, a spiritual director. Again, to have someone who can help you figure out what's your spiritual hunger and how can that might be fed. So you might be wondering, so what does that have to do with Christmas? This wonderful feast of God's love incarnate. My focus this year, as I was doing my reflection, really is just on one small verse, one simple action in the gospel story that we hear about several times today. After Jesus was born, what do we hear said in Luke? He is laid in a manger. Another word is creche, but he's laid there. If you're familiar with the manger, it is actually a feeding trough. So the food had to be cleared away. You know, this is where the animals would have gathered in the stable area. And my imagination that as they laid him there and he rested, the sheep and the donkeys, maybe the cows, they still kept coming there out of habit. And it's like, well, this doesn't look like what I eat, but they're sniffing. They probably did the wet puppy nose on them or something like that. And then they went about where they were to be fed. I think in his wonderful wisdom, Luke gives us a great imagery of Jesus beating in this feeding trough. For later in his life, he will give us his very body and blood to sustain us in the great gift we call the Eucharist. But for right now, here he is in a trough, and it's something to remember all the time. And you can, because at the far right over there on our windows, we have another manger. And so it's always to keep remembering about this infant who is here and has come to celebrate. And so in light of that, the other thing is all this is taking place in the town called Bethlehem, which you know, which in translation Hebrew is the house of bread. So this whole sense about being fed by this little one. Some questions for Christmas reflections. What are the hungers of your heart, particularly as 2019 comes to an end? What are some of your hungers? And are you able to live with being hungry? Because you see, we have a real habit of when I'm hungry, we want to meet that need right away. You know, the old idea, can you walk away from the table a little hungry? But can we do that too? Can we live with still having a little hunger in our appetite? Do I believe that Jesus can satisfy my hungry heart, as the song says? And finally, having been fed even by the infant, am I ready to feed one another? Last thought. A baby, and you all know this who've been parents, changes everything. Adults speak a language no one can understand, but they think the child can. People who would never open their mouths in church hum and sing and sway when they hold the little one in their arms. There's also like a built-in radar system. For once they cry, everyone is drawn to it, especially the women. And what happens with the cry? It's usually a reminder they want to be held, changed, or fed. How interesting that later in life is that not what Jesus will also do. He will hold us, he will feed us, he will ask us to change. But for right now, he is an infant. And we are called to be attentive to him. And especially to be attentive to the Christ that is in each one of us, our neighbors, our family members, our friends. And as attentive as we are to a newborn, may we also be attentive to the Christ in one another.